Hi, and welcome everyone to this discussion on building AI products. As you know, we are hosting this on the Indian Startup Club, which is the topmost startup club in Clubhouse in terms of members. So feel free to invite others who you think would benefit from this discussion to join the room by clicking on the plus button at the bottom of your screen. So I would like to start with an overview of the discussion. So we'll have a discussion for the first 20 or 30 minutes so around what problem Qure.ai is solving and how it achieves the problem solution fit, and then open up for some audience question, post which we'll dive again into the discussion and understand how to go about building AI products that users want, and then open up for audience questions for the final time. So with that let's start with some intros. I'm Pranjit Shah. I'm an AI practice head by profession with experience in building AI products across retail, healthcare, and MLOps. I'm also the host of Deep Tech Musings podcast, wherein we talk to exciting deep tech startups and professionals. So be sure to check that out. Links are in my bio. With me today is Ankit, who is the senior product manager and founding member of Qure.ai, an AI startup in the medical imaging domain. So, Ankit, welcome to the show. So, can you start by letting us know a brief about yourself, starting from your education and research days, and then how you identified a problem to work on at Qure.ai?
Yeah, sure, Pranajit. So, first of all, thanks for inviting me to this chat and thanks for everyone for joining in. Education wise, I did my BTech MTech dual degree at IIT Kanpur. So, I passed out in 2015 from Com Science. And during my college year itself, I was quite involved with artificial intelligence. And in fact, my master's thesis was actually building an OCR for Devanagari script. And that is how my intervention with AI happened. Post that, I started a company called Crankout along with four other co-founders. So it was into health and fitness space. We ran it for 8 to 9 months and unfortunately didn't do as well as expected. And then I met Prashant and Pooja and we started working on Cure. So talking about the early days of Cure, so we had an idea that we wanted to use AI in healthcare. We were not very fixated on where we can make an impact at those times. So after doing some market research and talking to some clinicians, we realized that radiology is something where AI can intervene, and we saw in scope of making an impact. So over there also we were, I would say, for the first year we were stuck in a chicken and egg kind of problem, where we were trying to create algorithms where and to create those, we wanted to get a good amount of data. So we are going to hospitals and radiology companies and asking them to give us that data. But they were asking us to prove that our AI credentials are actually good through some algorithms. So we needed data to build that algorithm, and people were asking us for those algorithms before giving us data. So what we did was we actually selected a set of 6 to 7 problems for which public data sets were available. So almost all the founding members were working on one of the problems. So I picked up identifying brain tumors, head CT scans, and we worked on these problems for 8 to 9 months. And then we had something to showcase, and we went back to these companies again, and then we got access to some data, and then that's how we identified which problems to work on, and we started sort of building the first algorithm.
Got it. I think that's a classic problem in the AI space, wherein, and especially in healthcare, wherein data privacy is such an important aspect that you rarely get good input into the user data unless you have a
Right.
strong relationship and or you have proven yourself to the point. And the way
Right.
you approach through public data sets, I think that's a very good approach of showing your province and then doing the work. Awesome. So let's also discuss. So you mentioned 6 or 7 problems. So one of them you mentioned. What were some of the other problems? Like, can you highlight a couple of more?
Yeah, so a couple of my colleagues were working on identifying interstitial lung diseases on chest CTs. Another colleague of mine was working on chest X-rays. Someone else was working on identifying systolic and diastolic volumes on chest CTs again. So those were some of the issues that we're working on.
Okay. And how did you ascertain a good business metric to improve upon while you are going about, pitching these problems?
Right, right. So yeah, identifying those pain points for customers and users is very important. So we identified a few metrics that can be impacted through AI. So one of them was, can we reduce the average time that a clinician takes to report on a radiology exam? Can we reduce the turnaround time for that report so that the patient is monitored more effectively? An important criteria was, so for example, while we were working on identifying radiological signs of TB, we worked on a metric where we wanted to measure if the number of cases that were being identified of TB on chest x-rays got increased due to using AI. So we ran that study with one of our partners in Philippines, and we actually saw that after using AI with chest X-rays, so our product called Qure.ai actually helped in identifying 25% more cases of TB compared to when AI was not being used at.
Got it. I think one implicit point which you have mentioned here while defining these problems and metrics is to have that early set of partners or customers, or
Right,
the way like I try to call it a board of customers, to
right,
because they are the ones who are defining in a way your path and sharing your journey. That's
right,
important.
right. Yeah, and if it's very important to get those first couple of, get good feedback from those first couple of customers, right? Because especially in B2B where you don't have, you cannot get feedback from 1,000, 10,000 people, right? So in B2B, if you have 20 customers and if five of those early customers are giving you empathetic feedback and helping you improve, so that becomes very important. So, thanks to our initial partners for being patient with us and help us make the product what it is today.
Yeah, it's priceless. Okay,
Exactly. Yeah.
now we have the problem defined. So what was the solution that you proposed, and talk me through how you got about proposing a solution to it based on experience.
Right. So, first of all, what we realized was, why does AI in radiology can make an impact, right? So we did some market research around that, and we realized if you look at the number of radiologists that are present in, say, for example, USA, right? So there are 100 radiologists per million population. For UK, it is 48 per million. For India, it's only 10. So there was clear need of radiology. And if you look at the radiology market, it has been like sort of increasing. Number of scans that are being done every year is increasing by 10% every year. Whereas if you look at number of radiologists, they are only increasing by 3 to 4%. So there was clear signal that technology is needed in this market. And then we proposed, using these metrics, we proposed that if we can use AI to sort of bring out and make radiology more efficient. So that can help a lot in bettering patient outcomes. We also, showed them how AI interprets images and what is the, it was not enough to just say that something is found in this image, right? So why is AI saying why that abnormality has been found became very important. So interpretability of AI was another thing that was important over there, and we put a lot of stress upon. So those were the use cases. And as we got deeper into these segments, we realized that, even doctors agreed that the workload has been increasing and it will keep on increasing as imaging becomes more accessible and affordable. So yeah, technology was the solution over there.
Got it. That's right. The problem was really a pain point in that case. Right? And I think
Right.
you also touch upon a point which I like to refer as the AI problem fit. So, how do you
Right, right.
ascertain that AI is the right tool to solve the problem or that it will create a value? And I think it's very important when we technical people or data scientists try to attack everything with AI.
So AI, sort of becoming a hammer that people are using for every nail, right? So which is not ideal. So first of all, if very simple and very easy to see signal is if there is a volume and repeatability in a problem, right? If there is a huge amount of volume. So for example, take normal images, right, on that you upload on Instagram or Facebook, right? So a lot of people are clicking a lot of pictures since cameras have come into mobile phones, right? And almost all of those people want to recognize things on those images. So there is volume, there is repeatability, which sort of signifies that AI can help in there, right? So that was one thing. Second thing was, we already knew that AI works on identifying stuff from images. So if you look at the AlexNet paper that came out after 2010. And with the advent of GPUs and processing becoming easier and cheaper. So so what happened was sort of we realized that AI can identify things from normal images. It can identify your friends. It can identify your family from Facebook pictures. Google Photos can identify your pets, beaches, trees, etc. from your pictures. So the only question was, can we take the same technology and can we identify diseases on medical images? So for in our mind, I mean, we were very clear that AI on imaging works. The only thing to check was, does it work on medical imaging? And apparently the answer was yes. So there was one interesting problem where we tried to use AI, but we found out that not using AI is actually more beneficial. So, like when you're dealing with millions of images, there are millions of reports that accompany those images, and you have to sort of tag these reports along with these images. So you have to find out, use among these reports. So, for example, say tuberculosis, how many of these reports have tuberculosis? So you find out the corresponding image and you tag them with TB. And we wanted to read these millions of images, millions of reports, bring out those tags, and then assign it to images. And that was sort of a problem that looked like a good problem to solve through NLP, right? Natural language processing. And we used some advanced methodologies over there, and we realized that it's not working properly. So then we went back and then we started building a rule based system, which was much simpler. And we just, so basically, while you do sentiment analysis on tweets, right? So we did some sentiment analysis kind of stuff on radiology reports. And we just started creating those rules with whether this term is present in the report or not. And we realized that those simple rule based systems started performing much, much better than AI. And so that was one case where AI as an hammer wouldn't have worked. So, it's very important to firstly identify the pain point that you're trying to solve and then do some research into whether AI is actually the right tool to solve it on.
That's an interesting story, and that example clearly brings about the AI problem, the dilemma that we were talking about. So, at
Right.
a level, so that everyone is on the same page. So, what are we extracting out of these medical images? Is it only the diseases that a person may have, or is it something else as well?
No, so you cannot identify diseases from images. What you identify are the symptoms of those diseases, right? So if there is cancer in the lungs of a person, then there would be something called as a nodule, which is, so if you look at a chest X-ray, it's a black and white image with the ribs becoming, ribs and bones being white and the airbags or the lungs being black, right? So if there is a cancer developing over there, so which is more dense than, so cancer would be, that uh, tumor would be more dense than the lungs, and so its sort of appearance will be very different from lung on that image. And when it's very small, it's very hard to catch on a X-ray, and it's sort of harder to catch on CT scans because CT scans have a lot of images. So there, you are using AI to identify those lung cancers early. So essentially, it's identifying biological signs of these diseases. Yeah.
Got it. So, another aspect which is quite peculiar to AI products and problems is to assess the technical feasibility of the AI solution early on, especially. Can you shed some light on how you went about it at Qure.ai?
Yeah, so technical feasibility is sort of important because, see, once you have developed an algorithm, you have to make it consumable, right? Just building AI algorithm is not enough. In fact, we like to say that the best kind of AI is where you don't even realize that it's AI. So, for example, if you take your Gmail app, Gmail is automatically putting emails into your spam folders. Or if you look at your keyboard while typing, like you are getting recommendations for words automatically. So these are tools where you are not using, where you don't realize that it's AI, but it just sort of works. So we had the algorithm in first couple of years at Cure. The next step was sort of making it consumable. And that was a real challenge. So we ran a lot of experiments with a lot of customers over there. And so we built a Telegram app after recognizing something. So for example, if a hemorrhage has been recognized in a head CT scan, we would notify the radiologist on the Telegram app with screenshots of those images. So that consumability of AI became very important. And then interpretability, right? So yeah, you have to highlight why AI is saying what it is saying, went around building applications where different medical teams can come together. So if you take an example for lung cancer, like there are MDT teams. So basically it's multidisciplinary teams. So clinicians from radiology, oncology, surgical sections come together and decide what's the best pathway for this patient. So for them, we built the apps and we gave them access to the radiological exams. So all of that happened, and yeah, so really, I mean, we put a lot of effort into making AI consumable. So just building algorithm is not enough. Like you have to make it very easy to consume, and you have to make sure that it integrates very smoothly in existing workflows of doctors.
Got it. That's a very important point that you brought about. And often we tend to ignore these end effects of the product, but these
Right.
is what I think makes or breaks a product in many ways. Right. And
Right. Yeah.
also additional challenges also that comes while we are deploying or making your AI product available. I think you're mentioning one point about wherein the earlier process was going or taking the ambulance and going to a remote area and then
Right.
doing the scan and all. Do you want to highlight on that as well?
Yeah. So this is again, I mean, so we deployed our QXR solution in the capital city of Philippines called Manila. So there, a van used to start from the capital city and go into different villages. They used to collect X-rays of the patients and then come back in the capital city again after a week. And so then these scans used to become available to radiologists in the city hospital, where the radiologist used to read these scans. So this used to take 2 weeks. And then after 2 weeks, patients who were suspected of were collected, and the vans used to take the biological tests, and they used to go back again to these villages, identify those patients, make them take the tests, and if they are found positive, then they were advised accordingly or given medicines accordingly. So this was for TB. So this whole cycle used to run for 4 weeks, right? So there, I mean, we used QXR to intervene. So what we did was the same van which had the QXR machine, which had the X-ray machine and had the computer where these scans were coming in. So we integrated our QXR solution with the same computer. And what started happening was as soon as the scan was right then and there, within a couple of minutes, QXR used to process that image and it used to give an opinion on whether the patient is showing signs of TB or not. And post that, I mean, immediately within an hour or so, the microbiological test used to be conducted and then this patient was advised accordingly. So if you look at the impact of AI over there, right? The whole cycle of 4 weeks got reduced to just a couple of hours, and it helped identify 25% more cases. And it's another great impact was that, I mean, the disease was not spreading to more patients because it was identified 4 weeks earlier, right? I mean, imagine if, I mean, the disease is not confirmed for 4 weeks and the patient is interacting with his surrounding areas and other people, and then there are higher chances of disease spreading to more people, right? So that was I mean, very highly impactful case for us, and it was also very satisfying, like to be able to create that sort of impact.
Awesome. Sounds interesting. Okay, so let's continue our discussion, Ankit. So you have the problem and a solution defined. So I believe the next step was to now grow the team and build AI product team, right? So can you
Right.
share experiences about that, how you went about it?
Right. So, I mean, as a product team, like, I mean, firstly, you have to realize that AI is just another tool that is being used to create an impactful product, right? So the only difference over here is that because there is a component of R&D involved, so that brings a degree of uncertainty. So as a product manager, you have to account for that. Other than that, I mean, a typical AI product team will consist of R&D team members, design team members, engineering team members. If it's a B2B product, then there would be operations and sales. And apart from that, if you are like us in healthcare, then you also have to have that aspect of regulatory clearances. So there is a regulatory team that is at Cure that helps us out with getting our products cleared. So yeah, I mean, like every other product team, we have different disciplines, and because it's an AI product, so we have an R&D team, and because we are in healthcare, so we have a regulatory team as
Okay, what is your view about having pure play data scientist versus a machine learning engineer? Do you think both are required, or is it not
well. No,
much?
I would suggest. No, I actually believe that, I mean, these are very different roles.
Mhm.
So doing AI research is more science and deploying AI models is more engineering. and you have to have different teams to accommodate that. Especially, I mean, when you are you are a 4 or 5 year old startup. So during the initial days of Cure, we remember then when we had the first algorithm and we wanted to test it out at a hospital. So me and one of my founding members, we wrote an app in Python to sort of productionize it, and we deployed it at a hospital, and it sort of worked quite well, the whole pipeline. But when things scale, then you realize that, I mean, engineering in its own is a hard thing to crack. So you have to have those awesome engineers who can get you product from X to 10x.
Right. Well said. Okay, so let's dive into the aspect of building the product now that you have these problem solution and the team in place, right? So I want to start with first with the data aspect. So can you highlight about the data requirement you had in the initial days, and how did you go about building those data sets?
See, as far as data is concerned, like, I mean, the more you have, the better it is, right? If you
Yeah,
compare, say, a Google search engine with Microsoft's Bing, right? It's not like Bing doesn't have as good engineers and research scientists as Google. It's just not picking up because Google has so much more data on search results and what has been clicked, what hasn't been not in last 10 years. So the same goes with any AI algorithm. Like the more data you have, the better you will be. So in the initial days, I think the first version of QXR that came out was trained on around 100,000 scans. So since then, we have expanded it to be trained on 3 million scans now. So that's the sort of scale that is required to do AI in medical imaging. And then, I mean, challenges in getting those sort of data is, again, as I mentioned earlier, is the non-standardized nature of how data is stored, right? So that is a big challenge. And then getting those data points annotated when you're dealing with millions of scans, how do you annotate, how do you sort of attach the diseases with the respective scans, and then how do you enable annotations for them, uh, for interpretability, right? So it's okay, I mean, this disease is present in this scan, but where exactly is it present? So those kind of annotations take time. So we had to build internal products where we would upload these scans, and then radiologists would work with us to read them and identify regions that were most interesting. So that was, I mean, that's the most important challenge in building any AI product. Like, a typical data scientist will spend 30 to 40% of his time in just making sense of data, cleaning data, and making it usable. So, yeah.
right. I was going to come to the annotation part next, and you highlighted it.
Mhm.
So what kind of annotations did you do? You mentioned radiologists would do it. Can you highlight a
Right,
bit
so
more?
annotation is, yeah. So annotation is twofold. One is for a classification perspective, where you need to say whether this disease is present or not, and that can be picked up from corresponding reports of those scans, right? So that is easier. I mean, that is a problem where I mentioned that rule-based systems work better than AI. The second part is segmentation. So, I mean, just saying that TB is present in the scan is not enough. Like, you have to show why your algorithm is saying that TB is present. So for that, you actually need to manually mark out those images. So there we partnered with a lot of radiologists who came on board, and we built this application where they could come see scans, annotate those data points with us. So it was, I mean, sort of a product in itself, like which was just solving for data annotation.
Yeah. And I think you would recall that Andrew NG is also coming up with his own product at Landing AI, which just does that single thing. It's basically
Yeah.
streamlining the flow of
It's
annotations for
Yeah.
computer
I
vision.
think it's based on automated annotations, right? So I
Right.
mean, the yeah.
Okay. And the fact that you mentioned you now have a data set of around 3 million records. So that in itself is a quite huge number and a big moat for you, right? In case, and it's a very important point for AI products. We tend to think about how to build moats, and the data set itself is a very big moat.
Yeah, data set is a moat, and that is one reason why I believe that India and Indian companies can be at the forefront of this AI revolution, because we have so many people, we have cheap internet, and we have the kind of data that is needed to build up the AI algorithms. So that's certainly a moat for Cure, but that is also a moat for India as a country. So hopefully, I mean, our startups use that to their advantage, and we see the AI revolution happening with India at its epicenter.
Well said. Okay, next I would like to discuss about your MVP. So can you tell me how was the first version of your product and how did you go about, building up on it?
Yeah, so the first version of product was very simple. So all we wanted to test was whether the algorithm is working correctly or not and wanted to get some feedback on it. So there were no quote unquote software or applications around it. So it was just a simple API where you can upload a radiology image and then the API would output for some findings. So right now, for example, QXR detects more than 29 findings on just X-ray. So we started with 4 or 5 findings and we just wanted to see if they are being detected correctly or not. So that API used to return a replica of that image with those findings marked out on the image, and doctors used to see them and confirm whether they agree with this report or not. So that was the earliest version of QXR that we had.
Okay. And then can you shed more light on your development approach? So what kind of approach do you generally take as you go about building the product? Is it more of experimentation or of shipping and then iterating?
No, see, so AI in healthcare is at a place where I would say food ordering apps were 15 years, not 15, I think 10 years ago. So nobody knew how a perfect food ordering app looked like. So right now, if I ask you to build a food ordering app, you actually have context with Zomato or Swiggy and Tiny Owl. What are the screens that you need and all of that. So that has been solved. AI in healthcare is not at that place right now. So people are building AI algorithms, but how exactly do you fit it? The existing workflows has not been figured out. So currently we are at a stage where being nimble and being able to experiment fast is of paramount importance. So that is something that we keep in mind while building our products. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And how do you go about prioritizing product features to be built through, say, various releases or various sprints across your development?
Yeah. So first of all, we have very clear communication within the team and within the different parts of the team on building consensus on what is the target of the product. So if we are just starting out a product, so all of us agree that we just need to build something which can give us insights on whether the functionality itself is working or not. So what doesn't happen is that I don't ask my design team after building that product or building that MVP, and I don't go back to them and say that this is not looking top notch. That cannot happen. So you have to be very clear communication wise that what is the target quality that you're approaching, and then everybody from every team should sort of agree on that, and then we achieve that. So we run our sprints, we follow, we manage all of our features on Jira. We use those sort of tools, but again, it's very important to remember the tools are there to help the team run better. It should not happen that the team itself becomes slaves to these tools, and managing Jira should not become a task in itself. So those are a couple of things that we keep in mind. And apart from that, if you are especially in B2B, right, often what happens is that your competition is not other companies. Like your competition is actually inaction. So it's not like, if you're not building a good AI algorithm, somebody else will build it and clinicians will start using it. Like clinicians can very well say that, okay, AI is not working, so I'm not going to use it. My existing workflow is working fine. So feature wise, you have to be very ruthless about solving an exact problem for the customer. And so that means that you cannot push around with the actual functionality, but that also means that customers are more patient and forgiving about the quote unquote delightful features. So as long as you solve a functional issue, they are more than happy and patient with you to get the product jazzed up.
I love that term functional issue. So
Yeah,
I am also a big proponent of having an end user stakeholder in the sprints. I think that
right.
years of a lot of hassles in the later stages, and I don't see many teams doing that. But I think it's especially more important in B2B, wherein
Yeah,
it's very
continuous feedback is very important. Yeah, you
yeah,
cannot build for 5 abnormalities and then realize that 3 of them are not even needed for that market. So yeah, so that
right.
context is very important.
Okay. So next, once you have your first product, I think that's QXR, right?
Right. Yeah.
Which is for chest X-rays.
Right. Right.
Okay. So now once you have that, how do you, and you have more products now in the line. So how did you scale from one product to this multi-product?
That scaling was not very hard for us because we learned a lot while deploying QXR, and the second product was QER. So, for example, when QXR, we were actually understanding diseases and how to recognize them on chest X-rays. So we developed a very good understanding of what lung diseases are and how they function. So the natural next step was to build a product for chest CTs because we already understand lung cancer. We have detected it on QX on chest X-rays. Why not repeat it on chest CTs and complete that whole end-to-end pipeline for lung cancer management? So that was one thought. And the other thought was to get into more modalities. So we were already working on X-rays and CTs, and we wanted to get into ultrasound. So there is a new product called Focus that will be coming up where we are using AI with point of care ultrasound. So yeah, so those were a couple of strategies. And then as we deployed at more and more places, and as customers became happier with using these AI solutions, they themselves were coming back to us and saying that, okay, QXR is working fine. Why don't you do this for this modality or this body part? Why don't you detect fractures on ankle X-rays? Why only chest X-rays? So those sort of feedback was sort of self-fulfilling, and those ideas kept coming up. It was only a matter of prioritizing which ones to build first. So yeah, our customers have helped us a lot in making those decisions.
Sounds good. And the last aspect for today that I want to discuss is on the output side, or when your model outputs are really getting consumed by the user. How do you ensure that your predictions or outputs are relevant with
Right,
the model which was built, maybe prior to few months or a year?
right. So that's a very important question, right? So firstly, I want to give a context on why it is very important for healthcare. So if you realize the cost of making a mistake in AI, right? So suppose you are using Google search and you search for something, and the thing that the link that you're looking for was not the first result, it was actually the third or fourth result. So the AI was not perfect. What's the cost of that mistake? Almost nothing, right? I mean, you still got to, and even if you don't find the correct link, it's not like you Google is doing much harm over there. That is not the case with AI in healthcare. Like, you're actually dealing with lives, and you're actually dealing with things that can impact patients. So there, I mean, to be very vigilant about how AI is performing becomes very, very important. And that is something that, I mean, we have always followed through. So we use a couple of approaches for that. So before every deployment, we do constant check on how algorithms are performing on their retrospective scans. So that gives us a good feedback on whether it is doing well or not. Then we have a daily online validation system where some 5 to 7% of scans uploaded to our API are read by a radiologist daily, and they actually give feedback on how they are doing. So that, I mean, that helps in monitoring the drift that algorithms are taking. And then, I mean, you also have to keep in mind that the expected behavior of product changes based on geographies, right? So if you're detecting TB in high burden countries like India and Philippines, so it's important to keep the thresholding accordingly. Whereas if you are deploying it in Germany, where TB is rarely found out, so then it's important to keep that in mind while deciding those thresholds. And one more thing that we usually try to do is, if we keep in mind that if we are going to err, we are going to err on the side of false positives and not false negatives, right? So if a patient doesn't have TB and the algorithm calls it to be TB, then he will get a microbiological test and it will be confirmed that he hasn't got TB. But if you do the opposite, so that's very, very harmful, and you have to train your algorithms and fine tune your thresholds in a way that you err on the side of false positives but never on false negatives.
Sounds good. That's a very important aspect that you brought about in terms of the metrics for AI development. Okay, so Ankit, thanks for all those inputs. So finally, I would like to take your view on advice for aspiring AI product managers, and even like how someone who is into the tech tree, how can he transition into an AI product manager?
Right. So first of all, I mean, you have to realize that when you are working on AI products, you have to see AI just as a tool. So I mean, the product manager has to be focused completely on solving the pain point of the customer. And then, I mean, if AI helps as a tool, that's good. Coming to transitioning from tech to product management, so that is something that I have personally went through. So I worked on AI research, and then I worked on engineering aspects of Qure, and then transferred into product management. So there, I mean, if you care about the product enough, in the sense that you are not satisfied with just writing the APIs, and you actually care about how the customer is using those APIs, using those products, then that transition is the right fit for you. And while you are transitioning, it's important to identify the blind spots that you might have and work on them. So, for example, I knew that I had a very solid understanding of the AI research and engineering, but my design sense was sort of not up to the mark. So that was a blind spot for me, and so I worked on it. I read books on design. I did some courses on it, and worked with our design team members to get my learning on top of it. So that's another aspect that you have to work on. Like what
Yeah,
background are you coming from? Yeah, what strengths do you have, and what are the weaknesses that you have to work on is important.
great. And I think the important aspect is also that I prefer that product managers should have some technical foundation as well. In many
Exactly.
product manager role, technical aspect is not required, but I think an AI product manager should have a basic foundational exposure to machine learning and how machine learning development takes place, so that
Right,
he
right.
can work with his development team in that perspective.
Right. So, I mean, as a generic PM, also, you have to understand every discipline of building a product, be it back-end development, front-end development, design, sales, etc. At least to an extent where you can converse with your team in their lingo, right? And if it's an AI product, then you have to understand that R&D to a point where you can actually understand what are the difficulties that your team is going through, because it's important to understand that so that you can have empathy for your team members. And we regularly do that. So our research team and technical teams regularly conduct sessions where the non-tech team members come up, and it's sort of a lecture series where we explain about AI in non-technical terms. We explain about deployability of AI solutions in non-technical terms and educate each other. So that cross-learning has to happen.
Awesome. Okay, so we have Dr. Shihad on the stage. Dr. Shihad, welcome. Please go ahead with your thoughts and question.
Hi, thank you for organizing this session. Thank you, Ankit, for your product, which I have read a lot about it. It's making a benchmark in the AI, how AI can help clinicians in managing some of the oncology cases. So I just have a very basic question. Maybe I'm not a techie, but from a healthcare medical perspective, suppose if a clinician has thinks that there are possibilities where there are a lot of data is coming in, if that data is properly mapped and analyzed, it can give us a little more insight. I think I'm not calling a word AI or ML and all, but I think a clinician sees a lot of data. He sees a possibility of analyzing and finding an insight which will help a patient. So in that case, how do a clinician, where will he start the journey of that interface between a tech or an AI scientist? I mean, that's where lacking. When we talk to a developer, he lacks that. I mean, that interface, where do we begin that journey of if we find some interesting insight in the clinical journey, where do we
Right.
start that interface between a clinical and clinician and the tech guy?
Right, right. Thanks, Dr. Shah. Thanks for reading up on Cure. And this is a very nice question. What I believe is tech disrupting healthcare is just starting up. I think there is a lot to be done. And for example, Cure is looking at using AI for imaging, right? There is a lot of scope to do just on radiology reports. So as you mentioned, that there is a lot of data coming in, there are a lot of images, there are a lot of reports coming in. So a typical startup idea can be that, I mean, you can create a company on sort of if a new patient comes and you have the symptoms that those patients has. So and the data is sitting in the hospital of previous 10 years of patients. So can use AI or machine learning to identify reports with similar patients, and then you pick up the diagnosis of those patients and see what worked for them, what didn't. So all of these analytics can be done. The challenge I see over there is that the data that is the way in which data is stored in various hospitals is not standardized. So that is a problem that we have also faced. But for doctors to get into tech, I would say, I mean, there are awesome online courses. So I would suggest, I mean, I started my AI journey with a course from Professor Andrew Ng on Coursera. So it's called machine learning. So you can start there, and then there are awesome free courses on fast.ai, so which is again a great resource to start learning ML and AI. So yeah, I mean, you can start there, and having that context of, I mean, being a doctor, you will have that clinical background and patient empathy, I think tech, getting a good sense of introductory sense of tech will be easy. But if you want to go deeper into it, I think I would rather suggest you get on a tech partner that can help you out with that side of things.
Okay, thank you. Just an additional question to that. So I see a lot of AI things are coming when it comes to radiology. All right. So
Right.
apart from that, there are a lot of biomarkers when we do a campaign. I'm talking about a couple of campaigns we did where we have the opportunity to collect the data the way we need.
Right.
Suppose we did a chronic kidney disease campaign where we
Mhm.
have collected 10,000 people's data, offering a free screening. So I'm sure that if that data is analyzed beyond the capacity of a human analytic power, it
Right.
can find an interesting insight. So these are
Right.
biomarker driven, not a radiology. Of course, you have the image reading and other aspect, but
Yeah.
biomarker driven AI. I really don't know where do I start. I have a data of 10,000 people I've done for the CKD screening for a different nationality. I'm based in
Right.
Dubai.
Right.
So where we did a screening of different nationalities and found some interesting. We were expecting hematuria, but we found a pyuria. I don't know where do I begin beyond data which is dumped in a proper format in an Excel sheet. That's the reason I thought I'd get some insight from you.
Yeah, yeah. So I think what I would do if I was sitting on, such kind of rich data sets of 10,000 scans. So I personally know that there are a lot of freelance machine learning engineers and data scientists that are looking for data, that are looking for interesting problems to work on. So if you can like get those data points anonymized, remove all patient information, and if you can just go on Kaggle. So Kaggle is a awesome machine learning community which hosts competition. So you can put up that data on Kaggle, you can define the problem statement and ask people to work on data sets, create a competition, and you will get you should get a good response over there. Like people will attack your problem and find different approaches to solve it, and then you will get good technical partners over there. I guess if you find someone that has done some interesting stuff with your data points, then that's your key to unlocking that and unlocking insights from those data sets.
Sure. Thank you, Ankit. Thank you so much for that information.
Thanks, Dr.
Pleasure, Dr.
for your question, and thanks, Ankit. I think that's a pretty good point. Okay, next we have Undrila. Undrila, welcome. Please go ahead with your question.
Hi, Pranojit. Hi, Ankit. This is indeed a very interesting session. Although I am not from technology background, but this sector interests me a lot. So I have a question for Ankit, which is healthcare is a highly regulated sector. So how did you ensure compliance and regulatory requirements are built into your product?
Right. No, so we realized that very early. If you're getting into healthcare, you have to have those regulatory clearances for for your products. So we have a very awesome regulatory team that takes care of that. So we get our products cleared by FDA. We go for C filings in Europe. We make sure that an independent body audits our work process of working. So we are HIPAA compliant on that way. So yeah, all of those is taken care of.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in healthcare, Ankit, often that takes up more time than the actual product building.
Yeah. Yeah. To give you an example, if it takes 12 months to create a product, it will take at least 6 to 8 months to just get that regulatory clearance, which is I won't mind because you are actually impacting
Yeah,
patients and people's lives, right? So it's good
that's
that
important.
those processes are in place. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So thanks, Undrila, for your question. Next, we have Pramod. Pramod, welcome. Please go ahead with the question.
Hi, good evening. So my question is that AI can be used in part of clinical things that is accept that is understandable. But is there anything that we can do in operation side, logistics, medical errors, like medication errors by humans, like nurses or the doctors? So is it a possibility that we can develop a product on that? I'm really interested in developing something logistics, misuse medicines or drugs.
So I think those products will come in after you start getting your medical billings online, right? So right now, it's everything is on paper, and it's that data to build some logistic on top of is not there. So companies like PharmEasy and NetMeds have come in and are making that data digital. And I think in 2 or 3 years, there would be companies that, maybe, these companies on their own will be doing analytics on logistics on top of that. So once, the problem statement over there is how do you digitize that data before, analyzing it to get some insight. So that is a problem that needs to be solved.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And if you're speaking up from the provider aspect, Pramod, so there are already like healthcare providers and the logistics and operations use cases there. So there are already a lot of implementation, at least on that aspect.
Yeah, on the side of clinical aspect, I'm aware of this artificial intelligence associated cardiac risk and cancer risk related products. But this is purely on administrative side, like yeah, reduce and like your bottom line you can improve with arresting the leakage.
Right. So are you speaking from the perspective of, say, a hospital or a insurance player in healthcare or?
It would be useful for both. Like a hospital can overbill and the insurance person can identify with the product. Yeah. At the same time, hospital can also identify like bad apples in the system.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of use cases around that already being worked at. I think hospitals and insurance people are already have a good workbench for data acquisition, and so a lot of use cases there.
Because most of there are still some government entities which are doing open bills, no single line packages. So in open bills, there is always a chance for overbilling.
Right. Okay. Thanks for your question, Pramod. Next, we have a Dr. Welcome. Please go ahead with the question.
Hi everyone, thank you. Hi Ankit, how are you?
Hi, Dr. Venkat. Good. How about you?
Very good, thank you. It's not actually a question because me and Ankit work together, but I just have a comment and just would like to draw the discussion towards that. So I was like in a state of denial. Why I'm saying this is that exactly like the state of denial that some of the radiologists are with AI in radiology. And in general, doctors versus tech guys, because there was a talk previously, maybe a few years ago, now it's probably less and less, that AI is going to replace the clinical radiologists, which is completely nonsense because this is all going to only help us as well as help the patients rather than doing anything else. So my thoughts were, we should actually get together more often, which is, the clinicians and the techie guys work together, because ultimately what we all want to do is, no matter how much investment you have in startups, how much advanced technology used in diagnosis or treatment of patients, if the patients are not benefited, all this is going to be useless. So the on the ground clinicians should work with the tech guys so that there is a streamlined approach to care related to technology, including AI and ML, is what I think is going to be the way forward. Can
Makes
I
sense.
listen to
Makes
your
sense.
thoughts, Ankit?
Yeah, sure, Dr. Venkat. So I have a similar line of thinking on it. Like when you talk about will AI replace radiologists, or is AI better than radiologists, or is it as good as that? I don't like that question because it takes away the focus from actual patient outcomes. I don't care whether you call it AI or technology or software or whatever. Is the end user going to benefit from it or not is the only question. So I will give you an analogy. So take self-driving cars, for example, right? So people argue a lot on whether human drivers are better or self-driving cars will drive better. So I'm not interested in that question. What I'm interested is how do we make our roads more safer? Right? So I don't know if self-driving cars are going to be better than human drivers. But what I definitely believe in is that human drivers armed with AI will definitely outperform just human drivers or just self-driving cars. And that is something that I believe will be true for AI in radiology as well. Will AI replace radiologists? The answer is certainly no. But radiologists who use AI outperform radiologists who are not using AI? I guess the answer for that is definitely a yes. So radiologist plus AI is definitely going to be better than just radiologists. Or in fact, radiologists are already using AI. Maybe they're not realizing it. So what I've seen is a lot of senior radiologists don't write their own reports, right? So they actually record their reporting through some app, and then that app actually uses speech to text conversion to make the word or text file of those reports. So that has made radiologists much more efficient. So they are actually able to focus more on the imaging and recognizing patterns in that imaging rather than writing out reports, right? The same thing will happen with AI in radiology. So AI will actually take off the cases that are normal, or I mean are don't have extreme emergencies in them from their work list, and they will have more time to spend on the actual extreme cases where the peculiarities are much more complex and subtle. So yeah, so I mean, overall, the answer is radiologists with AI will definitely outperform only radiologists and only AI.
Absolutely. And that is what I keep saying to all my colleagues and juniors that, we all need to get at least a little bit of tech savvy rather than
Right.
opposing it, embrace it, and then see how it
Exactly.
goes. And, when I use AI in my own practice, like I'm using every day now, I cannot
Right.
go back to my previous years where there was no AI. I feel that was really ancient. And more importantly, perhaps, patient is going to be definitely benefited. And
Right.
that's the crucial thing which we are all need to concentrate on. We should all be patient centric whenever we
Right.
talk
Right.
about a health tech startup.
Yeah, yeah. And that's only for, I mean, areas or countries where radiology is actually accessible, right? I mean, there are rural regions in India, or I mean, other low and middle income countries where radiology itself is not accessible. So there, I mean, you will see the same scenario as has happened with mobile phones versus landlines, right? I mean, mobile phones reached these rural areas before the government could actually give them access to landlines. So will we be able to produce enough radiologists in next 20 years to meet that demand? That is highly suspicious, because I mean, it takes good amount of 7 to 8 years to get trained as a good radiologist, right? But I mean, can AI sort of give a second opinion where radiology itself is not accessible? So that scaling can be much faster. But when you come to developed countries and cities in India where radiologists are actually present and they are accessible, then there it becomes more of a use case of how do you make radiologists more efficient and how do you benefit patients by making that whole turnaround time smaller. Yeah.
Absolutely agree with your thoughts. And interestingly, when you talk about this particular topic, I cannot help but draw my attention towards a recent innovation talk in the UK where I was a speaker. And they were just opening up the future world regarding what kind of innovations that you would like to see or envisage in the future, say about 10, 20 years from now. So Ankit, what do you envisage? Do you envisage radiology or healthcare AI to what extent can that go? And when they put the question to me, it all opened up like a fantasy sci-fi movie, and there was really no limitations to the thought process that people were having. And
Right.
in my view, one realistic possibility which I could sense was, can AI in radiology especially pick up other parameters like clinical parameters, including things like age, genetics, body weight, numerous other risk factors to predict how much percentage of risk that the patient may have, say, for developing disease in the future, say after 10 years from now. And that was a very interesting talk that I was involved in. Ankit, I want to listen to you what you think is the wildest possibility that you can think about.
So wild is actually a bit hard to predict, but I definitely see radiology going the route of how planes are being flown these days, right? If you look at what pilots do these days, I mean, so most of the time the plane is flying on autopilot. It's only when, I mean, they're landing or they're taking off or there is some turbulence. So basically the edge cases or the extreme cases where you need a human to hold the hands of the technology and guide them through it, right? So I definitely see that happening for radiology, where for example, a typical radiologist is reading 30 exams in a day today, right? Say 15 to 20 of them are normal, eight of them are having common abnormalities, and only one or two of them have some complex abnormalities, right? So if AI can take that 20 images off their work list, so they will actually be able to focus on 30 abnormal cases. So, which means that essentially they will be reading 200 exams a day rather than just 30 exams a day, which means the same amount of radiologists will be able to take 10x or 15x amount of work, which will make radiology accessible to every nook and corner of the world. So that's my, I mean, that's actually what Cure's vision is to make healthcare accessible and affordable for all. So that's definitely where I see radiology going in. Apart from that, healthcare is. There are a lot of interesting companies that are trying to disrupt the way that healthcare is done right now. I see. So basically, technologies like Oculus helping a lot with doctors. So virtual reality is something where I see doctors being trained to conduct surgeries rather than on real bodies. So that is also something that is definitely possible, and we will see in 5 to 10 years.
I want to say, I wanted to add something. Can be very much useful in areas where the is not there, like expert radiologist or a cardiologist who is not there in rural areas. See, whenever you see a abnormal CT scan, even for Corat score, we were supposed to wait for 2 to 3 hours or sometimes 10 hours in my place where I'm working now. So we had that problem in the COVID times. So what I feel is that basic AI can differentiate from normal to abnormal. Then at least we can get the better treatment for the patient. Could be acute, like any respiratory distress. Is it COVID or not? Something like that. And also, what you said is right. Like the doctor radiologist can focus on more complicated cases. If suppose
Right,
he has to perform a procedure, he can basically perform a procedure because he is the only one who can do that, whether it could be a biopsy or something else.
right.
So
It's
we
interesting you
can,
mentioned COVID. Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry, please complete. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
So,
especially in the times of the COVID second wave, we were having a
yeah.
surge of cases every day, like unable to differentiate whether it needs a ICU admission or not. Like MBBS doctor cannot predict it. Okay, radiologist was very much busy with so many other things, strokes and other reporting structure, and he was supposed to do procedures because I am working in. So I have
Right.
very shortage of experts. So in those areas, this will be really useful, especially in a RMP. He don't know how to read an ECG. So if it is an MI, he can just give the loading dose and he can send the patient. There are more chances of survival of that patient.
In other words,
Right.
what I think is there is a very good use case scenario for public health, use of
Exactly.
technology, including AI and ML. It can really make a huge difference to a large number of people in one go, and that is where the power can be utilized appropriately.
Yes. Interesting that Pranajit, you mentioned COVID, right? So I remember the first wave before it struck India, right? The city that was worst affected was Lombardy in Italy. And we had actually pivoted QXR to identify COVID in chest x-rays. And we were the first AI company to be used for COVID in hospitals. So we deployed in Lombardy. And what we realized was AI is useful in identifying abnormalities, but with diseases like COVID, the greatest value comes in monitoring the progression of the disease, right? So it's okay to say that whether the disease is present or not. But during COVID times, like the scans for the same patient were done every other day, on the third day, on the fifth day, on the seventh day, and AI could actually quantify what percent of the lungs were affected with COVID and how the patient was being affected by the medication that is being given. So whether the disease is progressing or it is diminishing. So that quantification and that monitoring of progression, when done in an automated way, can actually impact a lot of patients. So we brought that algorithm to India also. During the first wave itself, we worked with BMC in Mumbai to deploy the COVID solution, and that also had significant impact.
Okay, so that was Pramod, by the way, but I hear you and I agree with you completely that often the major cost savings in healthcare is by reducing the severity vis-a-vis detecting the event. Right.
Right.
So, Dr. Venkat, thanks for joining and thanks for sharing your thoughts. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Okay, thanks for sharing those inputs and for your views. I think that was quite interesting to learn about your journey and the journey of Qure.ai. Any final thoughts you have?
Actually, I would just like to say that healthcare is booming. Digital healthcare is booming more, and there is a lot of scope to work over there. In fact, even at Cure, product team is one of the newest team, and we are also looking for smart people to join our team. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. So yeah, I want the startup community in India to disrupt healthcare and disrupt it positively so that we can make life easy for Dr. Venkat.
Yes,
Yeah.
certainly. It certainly sounds an exciting team and an exciting product, and definitely urge everyone to read up more about it. And if any questions or anyone, do feel free to reach out to Ankit directly or myself. Okay. Okay. Thanks everyone for your time today and for joining in. And thanks, Ankit, once again for sharing your thoughts and insights.